Okay, Alexander, let's get into where Jeffrey Epstein got his money, how he got rich, and we may have some hints as to how he made his $500 million fortune, or at least that's what it's been measured at. That's what we know of. But let me take you to the Daily Mail and a story that they ran the other day with the title, "Did Jeffrey Epstein get rich on the back of Robert Maxwell's stolen pension pot millions?" Edward J. Epstein investigates the seemingly unsolvable mystery of how Prince Andrew's pedophile friend made his fortune. Now, Edward J. Epstein is no relation to Jeffrey Epstein, so that's the first thing I want to point out. And the second thing I want to say is Robert Maxwell's pension pot millions. That is an interesting story in and of itself. We've actually done a video examining Robert Maxwell, but maybe you can give us some context as to what they mean when they invoke the pension pot millions of Robert Maxwell, the father of Ghislaine Maxwell, and a very famous father at that. And the Daily Mail, the Mail Online, running a title with the wording, "Andrew's pedophile friend made his fortune." That is a very deliberate jab at the royals, I would say.
Absolutely.
Very deliberate jab. So, Alexander, get into this story.
Yeah, let's deal with the last first, because you're absolutely right. It's an extraordinary, strong sentence, expression. Andrew's pedophile friend. Of course, all that's true. That's exactly what Epstein was. He was Prince Andrew's friend, and he was a pedophile. But linking the two men together like that is going to really be very, very difficult for Andrew, for Prince Andrew, and for the royal family. And it is a sign of how much damage this whole affair is doing to the British royal family. Because I must say, I explain to our viewers, those who are not British, that the Daily Mail is the most ardently royalist newspaper in Britain. It is conservative, and it is patriotic, and it is extremely royalist. It supports the monarchy. It's sort of lionized members of the royal family. It's usually completely uncritical of them, but clearly even it has now turned on Andrew, and by making comments like that, it's shown how disillusioned people are in Britain, obviously with Andrew himself, but with the royal family in general, because it's impossible to separate him from them, because he is, after all, the Queen's second son. So that's quite an extraordinary, expression, and it shows how the impact of this story in Britain. Now, turning to the substance of this story, first of all, Robert Maxwell, just to remind our viewers, was this extraordinary man. He was originally from what's now the Czech Republic. He escaped here from the Nazis, came here during the war, or just before the war. He became a multimillionaire publisher. He was heavily involved with intelligence agencies, especially the Israeli one, but even strangely enough, for the Soviet one and the British one. He was constantly involved in the secret worlds. He arranged arms for Israel for the 1948 war. He was able to enable Israel to obtain arms from Czechoslovakia at that time. And he was also, for a time, a Labour MP and very closely associated with Britain's Labour Party. So he's a most interesting man, and he became immensely rich. And again, some uncertainty as to exactly how, but towards the end of his life, he was spending money, again, not entirely clear on what, and it was out of control, and he started to raid the pension funds of his own businesses. And then he died this very mysterious death when he fell off his yacht in 1991, a yacht, by the way, called the Lady Ghislaine. named after his daughter, Ghislaine Maxwell. And he died in the Bay of Biscay. He was drowned. And then it became clear that he'd stolen all these vast sums of his pension funds, in other words, from the pensioners of his own companies. And then there was a huge investigation. Some of that money was recovered. A lot of it wasn't. And there's always been a mystery as to what became of it. Now, one of the theories that appears in this article is that by Edward J. Epstein, who, as Alex correctly says, has nothing to do with Jeffrey Epstein.
He's actually an American. I got it right here. American investigative journalist,
and a very good one too, by the way. I mean, I've read many pieces by him over the years. He's very good, a very good investigative journalist. Anyway, one of the points he suggested is that Robert Maxwell dies in 1991. Within a year or so, Ghislaine and Jeffrey Epstein are in some form together. At least they're knowing each other, and it's possible that what happened and what is the source of Jeffrey Epstein's huge fortune is that he was basically hiding the pension funds for the stolen Maxwell pension funds, and that this is the connection between him and Ghislaine. And that would make sense. That is completely, I mean, it's not proved. There's no concrete evidence of this, but circumstantially it certainly looks plausible, and the timing makes complete sense. And the other thing that's really interesting about Edward J. Epstein's article is that he points out that before this happened, before Ghislaine and Jeffrey Epstein got together and shortly after Robert Maxwell died, Jeffrey Epstein had been, floating around New York, involving himself in all sorts of business activities of various descriptions, but that he was not taken very seriously, and he was a rather dubious figure and was seen as something of a con man, actually. In other words, I mean, certainly not someone who you would expect to become an immensely rich man in the way that Jeffrey Epstein did become an immensely rich man. And Edward J. Epstein knew Jeffrey Epstein in the 80s and repeatedly said that, as he saw, that Jeffrey Epstein rise and become this, enormously rich man, he was just puzzled. He couldn't understand how the person that he'd known for a time in the 80s could possibly become so rich. It just didn't make any sense. And whenever he met Jeffrey Epstein, there was a long period when they weren't talking to each other because they fell out. I mean, something like 30 years. But when they did when they met up again, Jeffrey Epstein was giving all kinds of different explanations, none of which were ultimately very convincing. So when you put it all together, when you look at the timing, perhaps this is indeed the missing Maxwell millions, obviously inflated even more over time, as they would be. And maybe this is the connection, what part of the connection between Jeffrey Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell. And maybe this also explains, by the way, this very strange court case. It's a further explanation for this very strange court case that she's bringing against Epstein's estate, which, remember, she's saying that, Epstein broke his promise to support her. Why would he support her? I mean, she's supposedly a rich woman in her own rights. So why would he do that? So we've speculated about, possible other connections. There's been rumors that we've had information from a viewer about a possible marriage in 1993, which we haven't been able independently to confirm, I should say. But over and above and beyond that, maybe this court case is her way of getting access to money that she has a claim to, because it was originally money stolen by her father. Possible. Now, I have to say quickly that Edward J. Epstein does also suggest various other explanations. He suggests that, in fact, Epstein's money isn't really his money, that he was laundering it not just for Robert Maxwell, but for all sorts of other people, including some very interesting people, Saudi people and Russian people. And he's got photos of himself with, individuals like, Mohammed bin Salman, the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia. I mean, that's also possible. I mean, I'm not saying it's not possible, but on the timing, it does seem to me that the Maxwell connection makes an awful lot of sense. And I would just add something else, which is that, of course, it's the theory that the Daily Mail is giving the focus on, because they've chosen to stress that in the headline. Now, that might be just to attract attention to the article, it's possible. But it may be that there's another motivation there too, which is that the Daily Mail also thinks that perhaps it's the ultimate explanation for why Jeffrey Epstein became that rich, that he was the man who hid away Robert Maxwell's money.
Yeah, it's possible. I mean, if that is the case,
possible. I'd say it was plausible.
It's plausible. If that is the case, then you always have to ask yourself, why would Ghislaine go with this guy? Why would she trust this guy with hundreds of millions of pounds? Why? It doesn't make, because to add some context to Edward J. Epstein's account of things, 30 years ago, through that 30-year gap when he first met Epstein, Epstein was a grifter, a con artist. I mean, let me read you a story. This is a funny story.
Yeah, I thought so. I know
that Epstein relays about Epstein. Epstein, the journalist, relays about Epstein, the pedophile. Mm-hmm. So here's what he says. He says, I gave him my cheapo ticket to Spain, and he gave it back to me the next day with a first-class sticker, a free upgrade. It seemed too good to be true. And indeed, when I tried to board the flight, I was told my first-class ticket was a fake. It turned out that Epstein had simply obtained a cache of first-class upgrade stickers, which he pasted on cheaper tickets in the hope the true price paid wouldn't be noticed at the check-in desk. Everything about Epstein was a con. I never thought, here's an honest guy. Back then, Epstein was not yet a tycoon. He lived in a one-bedroom apartment at Solo Tower at 265 East 66th Street. At the time, there was a rent strike, so he lived there without paying a cent. Now then, Epstein hooked up with Hoffenberg, who had his own Ponzi scheme going on with his company, Tower International, which was a bill collection agency. Hoffenberg got arrested, but Epstein didn't. Epstein got off, even though they were working hand in hand together. Maybe, just maybe, the authorities or the intelligence agencies got a hold of Epstein then. They connected him with Ghislaine, and they said, you're going to get off, but this is what you're going to be doing from now on. Maybe. I don't know. I'm throwing something out there too, because there has to be a reason Ghislaine hooked up with a con artist like that.
Absolutely. And the other story, by the way, which I find absolutely extraordinary and very, very bizarre, is that apparently, in order to give the impression, this is in the 80s, that he owned a penthouse flat, he would hold parties at the top of a building, which is a sort of public garden or something like that, and pretend it was part of his own penthouse. And I mean, it was
just food delivered.
Food delivered, exactly. Yeah. I mean, it was just all complete fake. It was all smoke and mirrors. There was no reality to it. And of course, if there was an intelligence connection, and of course we don't know this, but it's possible. I mean, it's plausible. It's not impossible. That might explain also if because Robert Maxwell, who we've just been talking about, the father of Ghislaine, he was definitely in intelligence, in fact, multiple intelligence agencies, and he was involved with all sorts of intelligence agencies, Israel, Britain, Russia, probably other countries too, but principally it seems Israel. But if Robert Maxwell was an intelligence agent, had all this money that he needed to salt away, and he needed they needed to do it fast. The Maxwell family needed to do it fast, and they went to their friends in the intelligence world, and they found someone for them who was Jeffrey Epstein. Well, that might explain everything. I mean, this is speculation, but it's not implausible. I mean, it's the sort of thing that does happen in this world, and it might explain why Ghislaine ended up with this man who, as you absolutely rightly say, it seems to have been a complete grifter and suddenly became stratospherically and improbably rich.
Yeah, you go back to the theory that it's Ghislaine that was Epstein's handler, and not the other way around.
Absolutely. Which I've always felt somehow was the more plausible way of looking at this. I mean, it's Ghislaine who had the connections. It's Ghislaine who always worked at the top of society. She's a much better educated person for what that's worth than Jeffrey Epstein ever was, and a far better connected person than Jeffrey Epstein ever was. And she had the international connections, which at that time Jeffrey Epstein certainly didn't have. And the connections in the art world and the connections with the international elite. So
intelligence agencies,
all of those things. I mean, on the face of it, she is a much more impressive person. I use that word, in a very particular way. She's a person with an awful lot more about her than the Jeffrey Epstein of the 1980s was, who seems to have been exactly as you described him, a grifter. I mean, absolute nothing, a zero. Frankly.
Edward J. Epstein says he was a con artist.
He was a con artist, exactly, absolutely a con artist with frankly disgusting sexual, proclivities. So, hardly the kind of person you would expect to become so rich. And there's never been any other explanation that makes sense of how he became so rich. I mean, that's the other thing. I mean, Edward J. Epstein says, he looked at all, he wasn't a hedge fund manager, which is what he pretended to be. Didn't know anything about that. Not really. I mean, he sort of worked in a few offices, but he wasn't really into all of that sort of thing. He was hardly in finance. He was certainly not any kind of tycoon. So how did he become so rich?
Yeah, I mean, I just wonder, I just go back and think to myself, maybe the intelligence agencies, when the whole Hoffenberg thing went down, if the intelligence agency said, that's our guy, we've got him figured out, that's the type of person that we're looking for, let's bring him in.
Maybe, I mean, he sounds like he was a caretaker for their money. I mean, caretaker for someone's money anyway. I mean, that seems to me by far the most plausible explanation of what he was. I mean, I should say, we had all kinds of other stories. I mean, the other thing about Jeffrey Epstein is that he's described in so many different ways. I mean, the British media at one stage was calling him a property developer.
Yeah.
Property? I mean, what was he? What actually was Jeffrey Epstein? What did he do that made him the rich man that he was? Well, maybe he didn't do anything. Maybe he just was someone that was useful precisely because he was a non-entity, and a non-entity that was very easy to control because he had all these extremely dangerous perversions, which meant that he was not, he could be kept in line.
Yeah. Well, Edward J. Epstein relays some pretty specific stories.
Yes, yes.
I think there's some insightful stories in that
article. Very insightful stories, and he's a very good journalist. When he says he knows something, he does. I mean, you can take him very seriously. I mean, I've followed his work on other occasions. I don't always agree with what he writes. Sometimes I think his interpretation of things is sometimes wrong, but on his reporting, I never have any criticisms.
Yeah, and I just want to say one more thing. I mean, it just came to my mind right now. There are situations where, Epstein could have been recruited as a caretaker and Ghislaine was charged with caretaking Epstein. And Epstein, over the many years, rose up to gain more and more power and eventually ended up, too big for those guys to control him as well. I mean, that could also have happened.
Oh, absolutely.
He may have been a grifter con artist. They brought him in thinking they could control him. And he just kept on gaining more and more power. His appetites got larger and larger. And at the end of the day, he got too big for his britches, so to speak. I mean,
it's absolutely can happen. Entirely possible that he became overmighty and a rogue out of control, and a rogue actor out of control. If you actually read, if it's a sort of famous spy story, if you read the actual spy novel Goldfinger, the famous James Bond story, that's exactly what happens. I mean, Goldfinger is a caretaker of other people's money. And he then starts he just gets completely out of control and starts on all kinds of megalomaniac things of, destroying Fort Knox and you name it. But, ultimately, that's how he starts. He starts as somebody who's managing the funds for someone else, in his case, Smersh. Who knows? Perhaps Epstein was doing the same thing, was doing in real life for someone else. And that someone else would plausibly be someone that Ghislaine Maxwell knew all about, and that was possibly the connection between the two of them.
Yeah. All right. Interesting article from Edward J. Epstein. I'll put a link to that article in the description box down below. Alexander Mercouris, editor-in-chief of the Duran. Thank you very much. Guys, if you like this video, click on that subscribe button. Share the video with people you know. Help us spread the word about the Duran. Also, go to PayPal, Patreon, and subscribe star. And please donate to the Duran. Whatever you have really helps us out a lot. If you have some of Maxwell's millions, send it our way as well. If you're hiding some millions as well, you'll find links to PayPal, Patreon, and subscribe star in the description box down below. And also go to the Duran shop, pick up some merchandise, some magic mugs. We've got new mugs, we've got enamel mugs, we've got new shirts. Yep. T-shirts, polo shirts, all kinds of great stuff. You have the American flag.
I got the American one. Yeah. You have the British, the two countries we've been talking about, the United States and Britain. We got their mugs with their flags. And if anybody wants to suggest, if it goes to our shop and sees mugs and they want their own flag or a flag of a particular country on it, we're absolutely happy to do that for you. Just let us know, and we will order mugs. We arrange to have mugs made, superb mugs, the best mugs in the world with those flags on them. And also, I would point out, if you go to the shop, you'll also find absolutely stunning looking enameled mugs too. So you got already the best mugs in the world, and they've become even better because now some of them are enameled also. So that makes them absolutely the things that you absolutely must have. And we've also got a new range of shirts. Alex has been working very hard to develop new products for our shop, and you'll find them all there, and they're astonishing. They're an amazing series of new shirts. And of course, you've also got hats, hoodies, stickers, and an ever-expanding gallery of ebooks too on all sorts of interesting and topical subjects. So you support the Duran by coming to our shop. As Alex says, we need your help to keep our program, our little channel going, providing you all with all this, gold quality and A1 analysis that we do here. And so you support us, you become the owner of all these wonderful things. Come to our shop. Alex will tell you how.
Just go to the duranshop.com. You'll find a link in the description box down below. Alexander Mercouris, thank you very much. Until next time, everybody, take care.